I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Hey, we're in Kingston, New York. City of the future. This is the place to be, millennials. Hey, millennials, are you sipping on your 5th artisanal latte? Well, guess what? This show is all about you. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Stacey.
Well, you might want to explain to people why those people were clapping in the background. We are in Kingston, New York, where Gerald Celente runs the Entrepreneur Conference, and it's all about entrepreneurialism. So we're here. There's an audience here watching us, so you might hear them make some noises every once in a while. That's the audience. It's a live audience.
It's actual booing from real people.
You and I often talk here on the Keiser Report about the destructive element of capitalism. Remember, we have creative destruction, we have creation and destruction. One of the things that has not been allowed to happen is the destruction of the banks. The banks have not been allowed to fail. So that's a destruction of the bank. And allegedly, possibly, theoretically, in the textbooks of capitalism, what happens is somebody else comes along and creates something out of the ruins of what was there before. But we're no longer allowing failure. But on the other side of it, we're no longer allowing creation. The myth of the millennial entrepreneur. Millennials are on track to be the least entrepreneurial generation in recent history. John Lettieri, the co-founder of the Economic Innovation Group, testified last week before the U.S. Senate. The share of people under 30 who own a business has fallen by 65% since the 1980s and is now at a quarter-century low, according to the Wall Street Journal analysis of Federal Reserve data. There's been a few studies recently about this lack of entrepreneurialism in the millennial generation. And in this report in The Atlantic, what they're pointing out is the high level of debt that they have from student loans, which is hindering their sort of risk-taking, and also the oligopolies in the economy. But here, let's talk about the actual data that they're no longer
you mentioned the indestructibility of banks. I mean, they should create a new element on the periodic table called bankonite. It's indestructible. Nobody can destroy it. It is the composition that makes up the U.S. economy. You cannot destroy the banks. No law applies to them. Superman can't destroy it. And as a result, you have an unmovable object, and you have this new generation that's being crushed by the baconite element that is imposing this draconian leeching effect on the future by giving this generation all this debt, because the bankonite, the banking cartel, they need that cash. If they can extract it from students, they'll take it. If they can extract it from the healthcare system, they'll take it. If they can steal it from your grandma's denture jar, they'll take it. Nothing is out of the reach of the bankonites. They will just go in there and their greasy little paws and extract every last sou they possibly can. They've been allowed to become this nasty, indestructible force, and it completely goes against everything that you would hope would be in a dynamic economy where competition rules.
So the millennials, the student debt number since Obama took office during the financial crisis, during the beginning of the financial crisis, has doubled. So it's now $1.3 trillion. Remember, what we did when the banks were all falling apart is we saved their bad debts. We did not let those debts be destroyed. We did not let those fraudulent loans be destroyed. We made them whole. And what has been the consequence is a loading of debt, creating new debt in order to roll the old debt into this new debt and keep that whole system alive. We have not, in order to prevent that from being destroyed, we have stuffed all this debt onto these young generation. Now, this young generation is also, the entrepreneurialism is really important in terms of their future, in terms of wealth creation, in terms of having a stake in anything. And I think we see that across, all geopolitics and politics and domestic politics and everything. You see the reaction in this, that they have no stake in the system.
This generation, this millennial generation, is going to be the first generation in American history that will do less well than their parents.
Yes.
So that trend is not finished. They're going to do less well than their parents. Now, typically in cultures and societies, typically in Europe, where you have no social mobility, people are born into a caste system what happens is they become very creative. They become culturally, they redefine what success means. So you have a different way of approaching your life, and you define yourself in ways that don't include massive aggregation of wealth as being the definition of who you are. And so this is coming to America, I believe. This next generation, this millennial generation, will start to really redefine what it means to be wealthy in a lot of ways.
Okay, and you can't have
because they don't have the money.
You can't have creation without destruction. We need those old dinosaurs to die away. We need those bad debts to die. We need those bad actors to go away. That has not been allowed to happen, and also part of this millennial generation not being able to create businesses has come because startups are getting rarer as a handful of large firms dominate each sector of the U.S. economy. 3 drugstores, CVS, Walgreens, and Rite Aid, own 99% of the national market. 2 companies, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, sell half of the country's books. If it is not quite a new gilded age for America's monopolies, it is certainly a new dawn for its oligopoly. So this is part of that creative destruction, creation. So we have no destruction allowed of these top oligopolies, these 0.0001%, that they cannot fail. But because they cannot fail, nobody else can succeed, or it becomes more and more difficult, certainly, for people to succeed.
Right. Well, in the past, you've had the trust busting of Teddy Roosevelt, who came in and restored some kind of competitive landscape in the U.S. economy, and that was a big benefit to the economy as a whole. Now, is somebody in the American political class going to step in and start busting up these trusts? Microsoft's a twice-convicted predatory monopoly. Is someone going to break it up, as they should have done years ago? Well, not when they have such incredible influence on the political process by buying their way into the political class as they've done, as Jeff Bezos at Amazon buying the Washington Post, by buying into major media, by this fascistic synergy between major media and corporations and politics. It's fused together into one corporate policy, which is now causing enormous damage to the entrepreneurial class in this next generation. So once you wipe out this current millennial generation, there's not going to be a one after that, because you're talking about essentially creating a country of zombies who are going to be addicted to the highest selling drug in America right now is antipsychotic medication, playing Pokemon Go. So you're going to have 30 or 40 million 20-year-olds on antipsychotic meds playing Pokemon Go. And I would posit that you cannot create an economy, a world-beating economy, based on that. I could be wrong.
You could be wrong, but so now it was the government of the United States, which functions on the taxpayers' money, that bailed out the banks. They took the taxpayers' money and bailed out the banks. Now it is the government of the United States who is the debt holder of these student loans. No, private banks are not in this business anymore. They offloaded all their junk, these loans, to the government. The U.S. government owns these debts, the student loans. So here's a headline about our U.S. government. President Barack Obama has commissioned a study about the student debt, because the student debt is an issue in the presidential campaigns. And what he found, this owner of all this debt, the debt pusher onto the millennial generation, student debt helps, not harms, the U.S. economy, White House says. The debt surge has hurt many, but adds to overall economic output and productivity, report says.
Okay, well, that's basically false. I'll tell you why. Because they include debt into GDP, and by saying that the GDP is higher, it allows them to increase their debt load and the debt as a percentage of GDP, and that means the banks can create more debt and generate more fees in creating more debt, and then they count that as a benefit to the top 1/10 of 1%. So anything that benefits the top 60 or 70 people in America is considered to be a benefit to the overall economy, and they would manipulate the GDP number accordingly by saying, well, all this debt is an increase in GDP, therefore the debt's not really that big. It's like in the UK, they recently included prostitution and heroin use in the GDP figure to say that, well, the debt's not that much of the GDP because we just added prostitution and heroin use. Now, is that good for the economy? It's good for prostitutes, yeah. Okay, they've got a new front bench in the House of Commons made up of Tories, which I think you can include in that group. And they say, yeah, we're increasing the GDP by sitting on our duffs all day, waxing on about how we're going to improve people's lots in life. But meanwhile, all we're going to do is double the debt.
Just as I said in the earlier report, the previous headline is that debt accumulation is actually harming entrepreneurialism, because these young people do not want to take risks because they have all these debts. So there is evidence, there is actual data showing that they go into safe jobs. So you're not having entrepreneurialism. But since early 2009, when Mr. Obama took office, student debt has nearly doubled to about $1.3 trillion today, according to the New York Federal Reserve. And so what Obama administration says is that there's actually a return on your investment because you get a better job. But they don't talk about the fact that these debts make people afraid to create new jobs, to create new industries, to innovate.
Look, Obama, by that logic, he should encourage Correction Corps of America, the largest publicly traded prison company, to buy out all the universities in America and turn them all into prisons and say, see, we've just doubled our GDP again. In other words, he doesn't distinguish between someone who's in prison stamping out license plates for $1 a day but generating huge fees for bankers and someone who's got a legitimate job in an economy generating enough salary to have a tax basis to pay down the debt, because they don't care about paying down the debt. They don't want jobs that are going to take money out of the pockets of Obama's friends. I mean, I'm appalled that he even would make this suggestion. It shows that the level of financial illiteracy in the White House is even more grave than I previously thought. What an idiot.
Well, the next empire, which is emerging, many say, is called China. And China is also dealing with entrepreneurship and trying to encourage it. And what they found is China's innovation economy, a real estate bubble in disguise. This is according to Reuters. And what they found is that the Chinese government's call to the nation to build an innovation-driven economy from the top down has sparked a rush by local governments to construct new buildings in the name of supporting creativity, with slogans such as mass entrepreneurship and Internet Plus. So what has happened instead is innovation centers have popped up all around the country and are set to more than double to nearly 5,000 in the next 5 years. But no incubators are showing up. No people are showing up. Entrepreneurs are not showing up. Instead, you have these ghost cities. Most incubators have occupancy rate of no more than 40%. The result, like steel mills, theme parks, and housing before them, the country now faces a glut of innovation centers as another top-down policy backfires to leave white elephant projects and a further buildup of debt. More debt, Max, that's it.
Yeah, who would have thought that the Chinese just couldn't point to an empty building and say, start innovating? All right, well, more to come after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Gerald Celente of the Trends Journal. Ladies and gentlemen, Gerald Celente.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, Kingston, New York. It is a happening town. You've been talking about it for years. We finally made it up here. This is a fantastic town, Gerald.
It is. Uptown Kingstown in the Stockade District, first capital of New York State, where the seeds of democracy was sown.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you've got the conference here, the On Trendpreneur Conference. So we're talking about trends as we usually do, and this is a year full of changes in trends or inflection points in trends, I will say. Things are seismically changing around the world. You've been doing this conference for a few years now. What is the hot trend at the moment? Let's just get into the hot trend. Give me your hot trend right now, Gerald Celente.
It depends on the field. So if we look at one field, we've gone from the industrial age, from industrialization to robotization. That's going to be a real big one. And it's going to take over just about every aspect of life. So whether it's on the factory floor or in the operating room of hospitals, there's going to be robots everywhere, taking care of the elderly, watching the kids, even walking the dog.
Yeah, I mean, I was out on the beach over the weekend, and they were talking about drones now being used to go out to in rescue operations, where they, before the lifeguards can swim out to the person that might be drowning, they can send a drone out to drop a life buoy. And so that drone technology being used in multiple different ways, robots being used. Of course, that means that there's going to be a big loss of what people consider to be jobs. There's a lot of jobs missing. There's a lot of people now, particularly this new generation, who are facing futures without the traditional jobs. How is that going to play out? We see some negatives to that. Are there some positives? How does that work, Gerald?
Well, you know, it's a new trend. You know, trends are born, they grow, they mature, reach old age, and die. So this is now in its early growth stage. So to see where it's going, you know, we understand right away. For example, you're talking about jobs. Look at the lowest paid jobs Among them are fast food. And now you're going to see robotization giving you your fast food really fast with not a lot of humans involved in it. So it's just like industrialization. You know, there was a big blow up in the beginning, and now, of course, new jobs are created from it. So you're going to lose truck drivers, for example. They know the routes. You're not going to need a driver. You're not going to need a driver for the bus. The bus knows the route. So when you're talking about driverless cars, that's down the road a little bit. But on construction sites, on and on and on, everything is going to be more and more automated. So yes, there are going to be loss of jobs.
Let me put this into some historical perspective and get your thoughts on it. Going back a few hundred years, we had the medieval days of lords and serfs, and huge concentration of wealth, obviously, in the monarchy. It wasn't until the Black Plague struck and half of Europe died we had the emergence of the middle class. Suddenly, the lords needed workers. They were not plentiful, and they had to pay something called a wage. And you had the beginning of the middle class. That's how it all got started. Now, in the 21st century, you've got the same concentration of wealth again at the very 1/10 of 1%. You've got a new monarchy. You've got it in Saudi Arabia, obviously. You have it in countries all over the world. It's coming to America. But that new model of lords and serfs, of aristocracy and monarchy versus the plebs, the unwashed, the lowest end of the socioeconomic ladder, that's coming back, isn't it? I mean, I see that coming back. So either A, we let it happen, or B, we stage a revolution.
You don't have to go to Saudi Arabia. Take a trip to the United States. You've been in England a couple of years. It's called a neo-feudal society. It's just like the old days, the noblemen. We have the political nobility and the economic elite. Different laws for them and different laws for us. You see it by the facts. They just had that Chilcot report over there in the UK where they found Tony Blair knew a thing or two about the lies leading the people in to the Iraq War.
Yeah, but, you know...
Did you see them taking him to jail?
No.
No. But if the little plebes out there, they cross the line, you have to live by the letter of the law. Come back to the States. Hey, how about too big to jail? It's a neo-feudal society. The gap between the rich and the poor in the United States is back beyond what it was during the Gilded Age. It's already happened.
Yeah.
You have 62 people in the world that have more dough than half the world's population. It's a neo-feudal society. It's already happening in front of us. And when you look at the populist movements going on around the world, you can see where it's leading.
Well, let's talk about this under 30 generation. Has fallen 65% in the is now a quarter-century low. Some of the lows, entrepreneurialism in this new class, this millennial class, this new generation. We're seeing in dramatic loss in entrepreneurialism. And we're seeing the rise of services like the Uber for dog owners. Okay, this is a new app. If you're a dog owner and your dog poops on the street, this new app will summon someone to come and pick up the dog poop for you. Okay, it's Uber for dog dirt cleaning. It's a new app, but people are willing to do that. I mean, this is below just, doing Uber for taxi drivers. People are doing that for subsistence living. So they're really ushering in this model of subsistence living. Pick up some dog poop and we'll give you a meal. So this is part of the whole prison industrial complex. It's an open air prison. But how do you respond to that? I mean, if the roads to entrepreneurialism are being shut down, if the road to capital is being shut down, what can the entrepreneur do? I mean, where is the path forward outside of an insurrection, which we're seeing more and more of that? Here we are in Kingston, New York, where we have the insurrection against the British going back 240 years or so. Is there a different path, or are we at that point where, as Americans, we must rise up again and take back our government by any means necessary? Your thoughts, Gerald Celente. You get the full burden of responsibility of answering this question. I throw it to you.
Well, first of all, it's gig jobs, they call them. So if you're going to live your life doing a gig job, you're not going to go anywhere. And we can see it with the data that you have the millennials graduating with $100,000 in debt. You look at home ownership among millennials, the lowest in history of that age group. Yeah, entrepreneurism is dead among them. There will be a revolution if the people want it, and Brexit proved it. The people have the power, and it doesn't have to be a violent revolution. Look what happened with Brexit. You had every world leader virtually telling the people it's going to come to an end. The world will come to an end if you leave the EU. And they said to the EU, we're not going to stay. And that was after all the pressure. The people have the power, and that's what they don't understand. And they're being ruled, and you began by saying it, the nobility. The nobility, let's give them different names. In the United States, we could call them the Republicans and the Democrats. I talked about Blair. How about George Bush? How about all the lies that they knew about what was going on with the Iraq War, and nobody's head comes up? How about all the criminals on Wall Street? How about 6 banks convicted of felonies, not charged, convicted of felonies? How many of their heads rolled? Not one. So if the people don't stand up and speak out and become themselves, they're going to be pushed down to lower even gig jobs than picking up poop on the streets.
All right, so let's talk about political situation in the U.S. You've obviously got a candidate, a populist, I guess you could call him, in Donald Trump. He's an outsider, and he's gaining a lot of popularity. He gave a speech at the Republican National Convention. The elites said, oh my God, what a horrible speech. But then the polls came out and he moved up against Hillary pretty substantially. So he's speaking directly to a big part of the country that is responding to his message. Where do you see that going?
He's doing the same thing that is happening in Europe, with whether it's Le Pen's party, whether it's the Freedom Party in Austria, whether it's the parties in the Netherlands. It's the populist movement. So he's speaking to the people that have lost everything and have nothing left to lose. And my campaign slogan, by the way, for 2016 is Trump or Clinton, Hitler or Hitlery. So there's a bit of difference between them. But what Trump is doing, he's playing on the lost jobs, and that's his strength. But when you listen to his speech, listen to, we have to have more police control. We need more law and order. I'm the only person that knows how to fix it. Words to that effect. So he's playing to the people that have lost their future. And Hillary Clinton, he's tying her to the banks that were the too big to jail. So we believe at this point, minus a wild card, and there's no other wilder card than Donald Trump, that as things keep going on the way they are, he's going to be the next president. Having said that, you're going to see the debates in the United States be the greatest show on earth. Bonham and Bailey couldn't come close to it. It'll be the most viewed spectacle in television and online history. And to us, that's what's going to determine the outcome of the presidential election in 2016.
Well, let's talk about how the media is covering all this, because over there at Fox News, they're now embroiled in a sex scandal. Roger Ailes caught caught up in a sex scandal. The entire staff of the 20 or so presenters threatening to walk out and follow Rogers. Who knows? The History Channel or the Museum Channel or the Porno Channel? Who knows where they would go? But they threatened to walk out. Meanwhile, you've got the Young Turks getting into a fist fight nearly with Alex Jones at the convention. So alt media is now, almost on a street fighting basis. Is this going to get more agitated as you head into the election? More media scrums like this? Are we going to see more media, on-air media fights? We've seen it in foreign countries. We've seen it in I believe, Ukrainian television, famous for having on-air brawls, the Turkish parliament on-air brawls. Are we going to start to see some of this in America? The Senate erupting in brawls covered on C-SPAN. Fox going to battle with ABC, with giant, enormous on-air battles. Is this something, because if it is, I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, look what's going on with the election. There's never been an election where different sides of the two parties are fighting against each other, protesters on either side. This has never happened in my lifetime. And people say, well, what about 1968? Well, what about it? It was a different trip. It was the Vietnam War, and they were protesting against the war, and the party that was the war party, the Democratic Party under Lyndon Johnson, that escalated the war. It wasn't the Republicans against the Democrats. So you're 100% right. It's war against the different sides. We've never seen anything like it.
It's all versus all, as I've talked about in the past a little bit. This is fascinating. We're up in Kingston. I was wondering if you could maybe stay on and do another segment with us, if that's
I'd love
possible.
to. Thank you.
Another segment with Gerald? What do you think, audience?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, man. Thanks.
And what about me? Crickets. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Gerald Celente. Until next time, hi, y'all.